All right, guys. I gotta take a work call, so I'll be back. Trevor's got this one for now.
Yeah, it's probably gonna come back in like 5 minutes or so, like halfway through.
Give or take.
Give or take, yeah. Hopefully soon. So, hello everyone. It's just Professor F now. Imperialism in Africa, otherwise known as the Scramble for Africa, the start of it all. What caused imperialism? A very well asked question. So, in the late 1800s, European powers launched a wave of imperialism, the domination of weaker nations for economic, political, and cultural gain. Why did it happen? One cause: the Industrial Revolution. It created this need for raw materials and new markets, because places other than Britain wanted to industrialize, and they weren't as fortunate enough to have all this water and coal and iron lying around. And also, they needed people to sell this stuff to. Once you buy a car in Britain, you don't need another one for another few years. So now less people were buying, so they need new markets. Okay, nationalism pushed countries to build empires. We know that. The British Empire saying we demand our place in the sun. Social Darwinism, which was the belief in survival of the fittest, which is, it sort of justified taking over others. What's his name? Rudyard Kipling, his poem, which was titled "The White Man's Burden." It basically promoted the idea that Europeans had a duty to civilize the rest of the non-Europeans. Basically, I want to stand for a bit. Basically, the white man's burden was that. Actually, I can't stand. The white man's burden was Britain saying it's our obligation to help the inferior being the Africans, the Indians, the Middle East, just the non-Europeans. They felt like we have to show them the right way. Christianity, industrialization. They thought they had ethnocentrism. They thought their way was the best way. So they used this white man's burden as an excuse. And then missionaries and explorers like Livingstone and Stanley, they played huge roles in bringing education and Christianity to Africa. So, the scramble for Africa. Let's get into it. So, until the late 1800s, the Europeans had very limited control over Africa, but everything changed when King Leopold of Belgium claimed the Congo and exploited its people and resources. So, let's go back. The reason they had very limited contact with Africa is, one, it was far and unexplored. Two, the main reason, malaria. There were a lot of mosquitoes in Africa, and the mosquito bites were deadly at the time because people would get the disease malaria, and there were other tropical diseases that the Africans had immunity to that the Europeans didn't. Similar to during the Columbian Exchange, which we don't really know too much about. The Columbian Exchange, when the Americans got diseases. I just thought of something. Oh, I wish Matthew was here. Okay. So, King Leopold enters the Congo, and he exploited them with absolute brutality. King Leopold is very infamous. He was one of the most gruesome leaders of all time. So, once they saw King Leopold do this, other European nations rushed to grab land, and this was called the Scramble for Africa. They were all scrambling. So, actually, I want to talk a little bit about King Leopold. So, King Leopold went into the Congo. The Congo is very rich in ivory, which is less important. They were very, very rich in rubber. Rubber. So rubber was able to get Belgium very wealthy. So what Leopold did is that he made these quotas, which were sort of like numbers that people had to hit. So he basically said, you have to get this amount of rubber. But he made them so unreasonable that these people were looking everywhere, all over for rubber. And if you didn't meet your quota, let's say this is your wife, bam, hand cut off. He would punish you if you were unable to reach these unattainable quotas. So, now, to avoid war over land in Africa, the European powers met at the Berlin Conference, where there were no African leaders invited. And it really just shows that there was no representation of the people who were being exploited, and how it sort of shows the theme of colonization, imperialization, all of that nonsense. So, at the Berlin Conference, the European nations divided Africa with artificial borders. They just made their own borders based on their own interests. They didn't care about the African tribes, about what was already established there. And their goal was colonial control, not what was best for the African people. They didn't care about the African people. They just wanted to do what they wanted. Matthew is coming back now. He's actually back pretty soon. So this set the stage for... What?
5 minutes.
5 minutes?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. This set the stage for decades of conflict, exploitation, and resistance. So I'm just talking a little bit about Africa. So how did Europe take over? So European imperialists had the tools from the Industrial Revolution, which we talked about. They had the Maxim gun, which was the world's first machine gun. They had steamships, railroads, telegraphs for transportation and communication. And they had the support of governments, investors, and nationalist movements.
So they
So
also had, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
you talk about this.
no worries.
They had medication. You talking about medicine? How that works?
I talked about...
That was the biggest thing. Again, Africa, there was no like metal gate around Africa that all of a sudden opened. The reason that Europe was able to go into Africa, actually no, the reason that Europe wasn't able to go into Africa originally was because of malaria and all these deadly diseases that outsiders could get. And with the developed, again, modernization again here, with these modernized medicines, now that they're able to go into Africa without taking as much damage. No, we did.
Okay.
We did. It was part of other stuff.
Okay. So
No.
Africa was...
Is that thing, bro? It's not in the curriculum.
So Africa was described as a treasure chest of resources because they had gold, diamonds, rubber, ivory, which I spoke about. So people wanted to open this treasure chest and explore it. So
Exploit it.
exploit both.
No, I know. I'm not correct.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the Europeans set up colonies, which was just direct control.
Yeah, you know.
They had protectorates, which was indirect control with local rulers. And then they had spheres of influence, which we've talked about, which was areas controlled for trade or influence. So whenever they went, they claimed land and labor, often violently. So now we have some resistance and results that Matthew is going to do.
Alright, so not all Africans accepted domination. Actually, most of them didn't accept domination. In South Africa, the Boers, which were Dutch settlers, fought the British in the Boer War. In Ethiopia, King...
Time out. That's going to connect to later apartheid. I don't know if you guys remember that, but the Boers and the Afrikaners all started here in the Scramble for Africa, which eventually led to apartheid.
Yeah, alright. Ethiopia, I said this before. Or wait.
Later?
Later.
We'll see.
We're recording a little out of order. In Ethiopia, King Menelik II modernized his army and defeated the Italians at the Battle of Adwa, one of the few African victories against Europe. And that was because Ethiopia modernized a lot. Again, there's this recurring theme of how modernization can lead to success. Happened with Japan and for China. Happened with a lot of these different countries. And Ethiopia, it adopted, especially with the military, it adopted Western military, and that's how it was able to defeat the French.
So overall, most of these resistance were crushed. Just some of the effects. So the African borders were redrawn with no regard for ethnic groups. So now there were conflicts that still last today. Look at the civil war that went on in Sudan. They now split them into Sudan and South Sudan.
And if you just look at the country, if you take a look at the map, you take a look of Europe, right? You see those squiggly lines. When you take a look at Africa, you just see straight lines, and that's because that Africa. And I said this. I forgot what I said it with. I said it with China. Oh wait, is that?
It doesn't matter.
I don't know. China, the opening up of the Chinese Empire. China had no say in what was done with their country. Again, they had a lack of control. Control again is very important here. Same thing with Africa. Africa, when they had that, what was that peace conference called?
The Berlin Conference?
It could have been the Berlin Conference.
It was the Berlin Conference.
It was the
I
Berlin
spoke
Conference.
about it,
In the Berlin Conference, there was no African say. They just drew these lines in the ground and expected everyone to follow along with it. Again, this lack of control could lead to pretty bad.
Yeah, so as of right now, there's civil wars going on in Central Africa, in Mali, and
Burkina Faso.
yeah, so it sort of just shows some of the lasting impacts today. So European economies grew rich all at the expense of the Africans, and that honestly sets up a lot of African exploitation that goes on for many years to come, whether it's the transatlantic slave trade or many other things,
Yep.
where Africa was taken advantage of.
Yep.
So wait, some things that weren't here. I remember the quote. Yeah, everyone wants a piece of the sun, like something like that. Like Everyone wants their, we demand our place in the sun. I talked a little bit about social Darwinism. So, I mean, that's it. So, that's Africa and the Scramble for Africa.
Yep. We'll see you in our next video. Nah, it's not done.